All right. Well, we have a quorum. Thank you all for coming. This is great. We have our challenge today is to try and develop some policy, maybe too strong of a word right yet, but to figure out a way that we can have substantive, responsible, transparent discussions that will enable us to make recommendations on a number of different issues, either in the legislature or at OPSD. This came about because, if you remember at the last meeting, um, Mary Alice asked for some input, and it got a little bit out of the guidelines. And so we thought in terms of how we were allowed to give that information. So we agendized this conversation, and the ones that are in the actual agenda are really just simple examples of the kinds of issues that are coming up. The cesspools, we know there's going to be a focus on that this year. The green fee, we're going to have a briefing on that effort later on in our regular meeting. The Department of Environment and then OPSD's housing were just examples of the kinds of issues that we have the opportunity. We're not required, but we're given the opportunity to make recommendations and to provide guidance to OPSD. So I want to open this up to all of you and help us think about what are the considerations, what are the critical components that will enable us to, at a regular meeting, make a recommendation on a specific issue. How would you think would it be best for us to go about that?
The first thought I have is that somebody, maybe not us, but somebody needs to do some fact finding. Because if we take the first issue that you list, the cesspool one, within our council, we had vastly differing opinions. And that could easily occur again. And some of it was just an issue of disparate facts. So, I mean, I would, me, I'd be happy to opine on this, especially this suggested list you have, Robin. It's a good list, but I don't think that's the role of the EAC. I think our role is to opine with a consistency and a value, and would have to be fact based. And I'm not sure that we're equipped to do a whole lot of fact finding. So, on whom would we rely for the facts of the matter to base an opinion or a position or support or not? I'm not sure it would be us.
All right, I just got a note from the staff. I need to call the meeting to order officially. So the meeting is officially called to order. Your comments are recorded, Makala. But you raise a really good point, and that is, I made the assumption that we were going to take advantage of this opportunity to provide guidance. But maybe that's the real question. Should we be doing that? Do we have the capacity clearly to do fact finding and to do the research? Maybe that's really the question, the cart before the horse. And the question might be, do we have the capacity? Do we have the interest? Do we want to provide advice?
I'd want to. I have the interest. I'd like to build the EAC as a body that is seen in that way, not necessarily with authority, but with knowledge and experience representing the places we purport to represent. But I'm not sure wanting to is quite as helpful as having a better structure. If you just take one of your examples and try to thresh that out, maybe that would be helpful. I'm not sure.
Well, let me offer something, think about it a little different way, and that is that the fact finding is going to occur as these bills are introduced and testimony develops, and we'll be able to sort through that testimony and use that along with our other knowledge and other sources to help make opinions. I mean, we're here more to make sure that our environmental policies make sense, that we're making environmental progress, that sort of thing, rather than, decide on a scientific approach to something. And, if there's huge disagreement among experts on something, about the effectiveness of something, about advancing the state's environmental policies, well, maybe we don't get into that one so much, but if we see that there's a clear consensus that that something needs to be done, and people are talking about the hindrances to that can be removed, and we see that a particular path advances the environmental goals of our state, then we can get in on it. So kind of sit back and watch a little bit and see what comes down. I think Makala raised a good example with cesspools, because we're certainly hearing a lot of different things here too, about what needs to be done. I know I have my own opinion, but I don't know if that's really helpful. I think, our overall goal is to advance water quality in the state, to make sure that our human health and our natural resources are protected, right? That's our thing. And we can look at these bills and say which one of them seem to, advance that the best. We're not the experts on enterococci or leaching rates or, remediation in different types of soil. And we're not going to be able to sort through that.
Rachel?
Yeah, I was just going back and reading the Environmental Council, like reading our little annual report and our purpose. It is challenging, because I think, I mean, any commission or group would be more useful having a voice earlier in the process than later, or earlier in an issue than later. I definitely, like, I'm weighing because I agree with Ron that, like, we're not the experts, and so getting into a lot of detail on exact sort of specific policy related to something like cesspools or invasive species and biosecurity is not, like, we're likely not going to be able to take the time to solicit enough expert input to have really useful things to say on specific policy. At the same time, I think the Environmental Council could be valuable to flag or raise issues before there's a ton of discourse, and say, hey, folks need to be thinking about this. There's people on Kauai or on Molokai or in West Maui saying that this is becoming a major issue, and that OPSD or DLNR needs to get on it, rather than necessarily sitting too far back and waiting until things are settled and then weighing in on something that's too settled. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
One of the issues that you have here, the OPSD housing, I think that's an example where we did provide some good input, maybe individually and to some degree collectively, to OPSD during the creation of that housing committee thing. That was based on our pretty deep understanding of the EIS process, the EA rules, all that kind of stuff. So Scott Glenn, we're pretty lucky. He reached out to us and, said, what do you think about all this? How is this effective for protecting the environment on this process? And it was in the like Rachel said, it was in the process of being formed at that time. They were still thinking about how to do it. And so we were able to get some early input. And we had a unique perspective because we're the environmental, council. And we're the ones, they're really in charge of that. It really have taken deep looks at and understand how people engage with the process and how the EA process works. For other things, we're going to be pretty far removed from expertise.
And for me, you know, it always comes down to place-based stuff, and the EA protects that, you know, most of the time, right? So the EA process has to address, yes, this is a good idea, but maybe not here. Maybe, you know, it's site-specific kind of thing. And so for the issue of the green fee, I care more about how it's spent than whether it's collected or not. For the issue of housing, I care more about what and where. I support it completely as a goal and as a, you know, as a broad application of a need. But it depends on where you want to put it. We just had one proposal here at the county that blew up on social media because they wanted to remove a little park that the county decided wasn't being used much, and they wanted to put a whole bunch of affordable housing in there. It seemed like a no-brainer to them because it was, you know, not used, and it was next to all the services. It was where they wanted it to be, and was where I wanted it to be, except that it was replacing a little neighborhood park, and somebody was making a judgment call that they weren't using the park. And my question is, why aren't they using the park? There must be, you know, there must be something. Can we look at that first? So, and I'm not sure that 343 even kicked in that case, but I just, you know, even really good ideas can sometimes be just not in the right place.
I have to slap my hand yet again as chair of this committee because A, I forgot to have us all introduce ourselves, and B, we have a visitor, Joy Yoshina. Hello. But let's quickly take a minute to back up. Please, Makala, who are you? The question of the century.
It's usually right there on my photo. I'm in Hanalei. I'm Makala Kamoana, and I live on Kauai.
Rachel?
Rachel Sprague, I am calling in from, and I live on Lanai.
Ron?
Ron Terry calling in as a member of the council on the island of Hawaii.
Robin Kay calling in from the island of Lanai. I'm chair of this strategic planning committee. Joy, would you identify yourself, please?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Just observing, I am a staff member with the Center for Mauna Kea Stewardship at Hilo.
Great. You're welcome to ask questions and jump in anytime you'd like. You're more than welcome. And our ERP staff, would you folks like to introduce yourselves, please?
Denjing, ERP.
Kim Mishimoto, OPSD.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Sorry, I'm running this backwards. Makala, you raise an interesting point. You say that you would rather advise on where the money goes rather than how the money is raised, if we're talking about a green fee, for example.
Or whether it's raised. So if the question before the legislature is whether or not we're going to raise it, right? Whether we're going to create and apply a green fee. I think that's the question at the ledge.
Well, I think it's also how will it be raised?
Okay.
And your point, where it will be spent. And I know Stephanie was going to join us for this meeting, but she wasn't able to at the last minute. So we'll have to wait and hear what the Green Fee Coalition is planning. But I think, you know, in some respects, when Onana and I met with Gabbard and Lowen, I got the feeling that on some issues it would be helpful for us to have an opinion. Now, of course, it would be more helpful if the opinion matched theirs, but that's a secondary issue. I mean, when we talked about the Department of Environment, they both said that they were going to try and do it again. They knew there were a lot of problems. They knew there were constitutional issues, but they thought it was a good thing to pursue. So, you know, do we want to take a stand on that? Are we in favor of it, or do we need to recognize the limitations of that conversation, or is it an important thing for us to take a position on? And if so, back to your questions earlier, who do we listen to? mean, you look at a
Well-
lot of the testimony. What, Ron?
Oh,
Go ahead.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Let's look at the testimony first, because I think a lot of people are going to weigh in, and then we can look at it through the lens of the Environmental Council. Does this advance, the environmental goals that we're supposed to look at? So, something like that is, that's a difficult issue, and I think a lot of people in administration will be raising, good points that we need to listen to, because those people actually have to run departments. And some of them may say, yeah, it would really help our efficiency to have all these policies related to water in one thing. Or some people may say, no, every agency, confusion goes up by the power of the number of agencies involved. We got to find out what the people who would be in this agency are saying. And so I know that Gabbard and Nicole are, they have an idea, but I don't want to just get behind their idea because they have it. Now, some of you may have thought through this much further than I have. So I'm thinking of it's an example of one that we're really not up to speed on, but some of you may really know a lot about it. So I would defer, to your opinion too.
It was
Well-
before my time, but aren't they trying to redo a thing that existed? I mean, there was, right? I'm not sure it was a department, but there was a thing, right? There was I can't even think of the name of it. It existed. When I first came on the council, everybody talked about, oh, if we only had that back again. And where's all the books that were there and stuff like that?
Oh, I think
I think
the
talking
environmental
about the
center.
environmental center.
Yeah, at
Yeah.
UH. That's what they were referring to, Makala.
Okay.
Yeah, that was interesting, but it wasn't really a department of the environment. I honestly think that Gary Gill, when he was director, was sort of trying to make OEQC into a department of the environment.
I want to remind us that our responsibility, our opportunity, I would been cautioned to say opportunity rather than responsibility, but our opportunity is to advise OPSD. We've chosen to also advise the to testify as an agency to the legislature, but specifically and it was Mary Alice's conversation about housing last meeting that really raised this. What do we want? Does that make a difference if we're talking about advising OPSD? Does that change our conversation at all?
Not mine. I mean, I see that as our role, as advising OPSD. That's the chair I sit in, and that's the voice I believe I have, and I expect OPSD to listen and to have other information coming from other places and to respond accordingly. I don't expect us to have authority over them. I take the word advisory seriously, but I also retain the right and the practice of testifying individually. I mean, that's not gone. I mean, if we take the issue of the Department of Environment, I think some of that vetting's been done, because it's been brought up several times, and when people have said, well, this will be great, no, this will be awful, and somewhere in between. And I think Lowen and Gabbard both know the issues, the challenges. The first one, as I understand it, is constitutional. So that's not a small bump in the road. That's a hurdle. Who's going to give up their department? And I do not want to be in the position personally of recommending which department goes away. That's my only caveat.
Let's go at this a little differently, and let's take a look at the last of those examples. We were specifically asked for input on OPSD, and I think, and please correct me, but if I remember, it was because Mary Alice is involved in the Maui housing conversation specifically. So if we're asked to provide advice, what process would we initiate? What steps would we have to have in place to enable us to provide advice to OPSD on the issues of housing. I mean, that's a huge responsibility, and we would want to do it with, again, with our limited capacity, but how would you, if you were responsible for setting up that process of getting us to advise, how would you do it? What would you include?
Well, my approach to these things is always who, what, when, where, how. That's how I start when somebody asks me what I think. And I think I am committed and have been all my life to affordable housing and equity in housing and environmental justice and for locations such as Honolulu, I've learned the hard way that just because housing is desperately needed, it's not a place we really want a whole lot more people to live. So we've had to look at, options, and that's been a big lesson for me, because of, the site, the place. And I think I'm very happy to be supportive of affordable housing with equity and environmental considerations, and I think those protections are in place.
Well, Robin, I think to your point of how do we do it, I think a permitted interaction group that was very active for a couple weeks to a month would be the mechanism by which the council would bring sentiments such as Maka'ala's and translate them to advice to the director.
Would you invite outsiders into those pig conversations, Ron?
We're permitted to do that. That's the great thing about it. They're not sunshined, and as long as we have a group that's super interested in it, it could be pretty effective. That happens to be something, that now that you mention it, it happens to be something I'm really active in right now. I've worked on many affordable housing projects throughout the state, actually. And right now I'm putting together a talk. It's initially for the Chamber of Commerce here on the Big Island of Hawaii, but I think we're going to record it and it's going to go other places and we'll go to other groups. And it's myself and Sterling Higa, who some of you may have heard of, and Trey Gordner. I think you put those guys' ages together, you could still add in a Patrick Mahomes and get to me, and but they're young, hot, really experts in issues of zoning inequity and housing, because a lot of our housing problems have to do with our zoning problems. Zoning was created in the 1920s. We're told to separate incompatible uses for the purposes of health and safety, make sure people could have good lives. In reality, zoning was created to keep Black people out of white neighborhoods. And even though I think governments have abandoned that as a policy, at least outside of certain jurisdictions, most jurisdictions, that's no longer a government policy. It's still the effect of zoning. And it's an economic stratification tool. And, a lot of us are looking at how our current, zoning codes and zoning maps make housing really, really difficult to do. Like in Hilo, for example, 98% of the land on which residences are permitted is single family residence only. If you build two houses there, that's a criminal action. And that was done to keep rich people's property values in place. And it's very inequitable because, for one thing, they live in large lots with tons of infrastructure that is very expensive to maintain with county property taxes. Very expensive. In fact, we can't maintain it. And the cost of maintaining that goes to the working poor who live in apartments that hardly use any infrastructure and pay massive property taxes. You know, my property taxes are nothing because I'm old and I'm an owner occupied. And my sister, who is, I can say on this call, is working poor. Okay. She's a teacher's assistant. She doesn't get food stamps. She doesn't get welfare. She doesn't get housing assistance. She lives in an apartment, pays $1,200 a month for her little apartment. And a lot of that is going to pay the owner's property taxes. And I use more infrastructure than her. I have a bigger lot. I have more water lines. I have more roads. I have more drainage that the county dedicates to my lot. And, you know, the three of us are looking at these inequities along with other people in the state. And this is a long story, but I'll finish it. You know, these are the kind of things that we could advise on. You know, environmental justice is a big issue for us. And I don't think this message is getting out very well. I think OPSD is interested in it.
So let me be real anal and practical and ask any of you, Ron, it was your suggestion, I think a good one, having a pig. But what would be the components of the discussion in the pig? We mentioned we could include outsiders. How would you see that conversation set up so that it could then come out to the whole EAC to take a position that would go to OPSD?
Well, first, OPSD should bring us the legislative agenda that they see, you know, or other ways that we can influence the policy in the state. I'm working right now on the county level. We're doing a once in a generation amendment of our general plan and zoning code. And there's some promising aspects to it, but for the most part, I think it's falling short of what's needed for zoning reform. But that's county. And I don't think OPSD is focused on county stuff. There's the state law can preempt some of these, you know, exclusionary and reactionary zoning codes. Maybe somebody's thinking of that, but we'd have to see what OPSD is bringing to us, you know. I mean, we're not going to introduce legislation, right? And OPSD also probably has a pretty good handle on what's going to fly and what's not, what's going to get a hearing and what's not. I don't think we waste our time on bills that'll never get a hearing.
We do have some good leadership in the ledge. Nadine having left chair of housing and gone to majority leader, Luke Evslin there now with housing leadership. He's been doing a lot of creative housing projects on Kauai. He's figured it out, and it is zoning. And he's done some zoning policy at the county level, so he has that background.
Yeah.
Hashimoto's got you know some speed under his feet on the issue. I think, you know, there's an opportunity. This one issue has some real legs, in my view. Maybe not this session, but certainly very soon with these young ledge leaders that are completely involved and invested and smart. So I wouldn't consider asking any of them to participate in the pig, but I certainly would have a sit down with them and say, where are you headed here? What are you thinking, and how? Because Ron's spot on. The zoning is what stops us. If we try to put affordable housing where we don't need additional infrastructure, where there are services available within a walking area, that kind of thing, on Kauai, it puts us in our few urban districts, which is fine. But it starts to look like a segregated approach if you're not real careful. You know, and how you get the blend, how you get the mix, how, you know, I always look at the children, how they play in the street together. You know, are they representing various socioeconomic, you know, aspects of the community? But I thank you, Ron, for that work. I can't wait to hear your presentation. I'm delighted to hear you're going to record it. Thank you for doing that, because I can think of several places that I'd love to put that to share it. And thank you for that work. But I would suggest to sit down with somebody. I'd like to work on this one. I mean, I think this is critically important. And I think a lot of our other organizations are looking at it too. Hawaii Thousands Friends has looked at this for a long time.
You know, I think a lot of us I regret a lot of positions I've taken on housing through the years, including some of my professional involvement. And I think I had a kind of a wake-up call a few years ago. And I look at some of my projects, and we put these people in the middle of frickin' nowhere, because that land was available. Some developer made it available, or for some reason we could do that. It's not walkable, it's not bikeable, it's not near services. Mass transit is spotty. And, you know, to me, those are worse ghettos than urban ghettos, because, you know, they're all over the Big Island. I can point them out, and I helped make some of them happen. I was proud of myself when I did it, because I was helping get advanced affordable housing. Now I'm ashamed of myself. I shouldn't have participated in that. We really need to put them elsewhere. We need to put them in the middle, where people have jobs, where they have services. And I agree with Maka'ala that we don't want to make a segregated area, but that's our zoning. You know, it tries to keep people away. I think that triplexes, duplexes, fourplexes in what are now single family neighborhoods could really work. And there's a lot of bugs to iron out on that, but they're doing it in other places, you know, California, Minneapolis, Oregon, Washington, and many, many other places have decided they've had enough of single family exclusionary zoning, and they're getting rid of it to some extent. And you know, there's a huge movement to do that here too. But you know, the people up in Manoa, they want to keep those cushy little homes that, I hate to say it, the poor people subsidize, you know, and they don't want to give it up. And, you know, we're all NIMBYs if it's in our backyard. I'm an NIMBY too. And we have to make a sort of a joint rethink about things. If we do make a PIG, I'd be happy to be on it. I will no longer be on the council, but, you know, I could be one of those outside people. I think that Scott Glenn is, you know, he's one of those key people, and he's inside the governor's office, right? Is that where he's located now?
Yes.
Last I heard,
But
yeah.
but he's working closely with Office of Planning. Is that not true? Jen, do you know?
Depends on what the topic is. He is kind of working with us, but not as far as I know.
Housing?
A little bit, but not too much. More with Mary Alice, if anything.
Oh, that's what I was actually thinking of. Sorry, I know it's a little outside of, you know, where you work, but he's on the floor, right?
Not all the time.
But he talks to OP.
You know, he talks to Mary Alice once in a while. I mean, we did have
Yeah.
a meeting with him. He was in the meeting about a week ago for the about the wildfires.
Right.
Yeah. So we did have a
okay.
meeting.
I know he was given housing to focus on. He called me and told me that.
Yeah, that's why I was saying that too.
Yeah, I don't know if that's changed because things have been in such a state of flux. That was certainly prior to the fire. I think
Scott would have a lot of advice for us, a lot of inside information to see how we could advance things. And he'd probably tell us, you know, you guys can make a difference or you can't make a difference. I think he'd give us that call.
Rachel, you started to say something.
Yeah, I was curious if, you know, Ron, a lot of the things you were saying are like, that's the kind of thing that I think that the Environmental Council could have a role in, not necessarily taking specific stands on exactly what the solution is for a certain community or a certain place, but, or instead sort of coming out in front and being able to say, hey, here are some standards for affordable housing that any department going into this should consider, from zoning to community structure, size of homes, of like not monster houses, but duplex, triplex, quadplex, including parking on, just like some sort of basic standards that saying, hey, we're gonna have a voice and advise OPSD that in planning and thinking about sustainable development, here are things that you should be considering when you're thinking about housing, and it could include some, things about environmental considerations or in certain areas. And I think those zoning and housing, because those do, obviously those impact the environment and water usage and water and wastewater and a bunch of other things. That makes me feel a lot more comfortable and excited at this than trying to gather enough information, from a community to have some really specific position on like housing in West Maui. Like that
No,
starts to make, and so
No, I don't
that
think we should do that. We shouldn't. do that.
yeah.
Not individual projects or areas or anything. It's more principles.
Mhm.
And these principles have really evolved in the last 20 years. And you mentioned one, parking. In the old days, that's what, whatever, we got to have enough parking. So this property is not appropriate because it doesn't have enough parking. Well, throughout the US, they're throwing out parking standards. They're saying screw parking. It's one of the main problems. We have 3 parking places for every American. And we waste vast square miles of parking in every downtown now. And as long as you have subsidized parking, you can't have appropriate mass transit, bicycling, and walking infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And you don't need all that parking. People do find a way around it, but that's one thing that NIMBYs can always use is, oh no, there's not enough parking in our neighborhood. You're gonna take away parking. Well, why do you have 5 cars at your house anyway? And
Make it walkable, make it bikeable. If people are living closer to their work, they're not driving as far.
there's the incentives, right? So there's some neighborhoods where parking could be a difficulty. There's other ones where it turns into a non-issue. And people find a way to make it happen. And when they find out when they get rid of it, their neighborhood actually turns better when they get rid of parking minimums. So there's a huge movement to get rid of parking minimums. It's also for commercial development. One of the main hindrances to starting a new restaurant or something in Hilo, there's no parking. You can't find on-site parking, and if you're going to buy it, it's going to kill you. And we have these stupid empty parking lots everywhere. And people are finally putting the two together. Wait a minute. But this would be that'd be a fun issue to focus on. I think green fees too, from my standpoint, I think that's the kind of general issue that's fascinating. I don't know much about that one, but it seems to me that's an important one. And it looks like it's going to probably advance this year, you think? There's going to be some sort of green fees, right?
That's my sense, but I think it got pretty far yet last year, but not far enough. And part of the issue is what Makala was saying was, where does it go? Part of the issue was what's included. Is it going to be a license or a permit to visit just 3 or 4 parks areas, or how broad will it be? So I do think we're going to see more attention to that, and we're going to get a briefing from people who know much more about that this afternoon. So, well,
we had a long-standing proposal in Honolulu because we were inundated. We had issues to address, and we had a ton of tourists, and we saw the connection. And we said, we just want a little booth. We want to collect everybody that we asked, and we surveyed, and they all said we'd be happy to contribute as much as $10 each person to come. And, they'd be happy to contribute. So we said, well, just let us collect it, but we want to spend it here. And that was the glitch.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing, and I'll be able to report to the full group, is the idea about not getting involved in specific issue, trying to get involved early enough to think about doing it through a PIG, to include experts to help us be educated, to focus on the issues connection to environmental policy, and then to provide some standards on specific issues. It's pretty much what I think I'm hearing from us today. Does that resonate, right? You're
Yeah.
really shaking. Okay. All right. Anything else? Joy, is there anything you need to ask or would like to say?
Nope, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for being here, Joy. That's encouraging. I just really want to thank you, Robin. This is a real skill set of yours, and I really appreciate this process. And it's interesting because these look like 4 broad brush issues, and yet they're really quite different, right? When we drill down to how we would approach them. So it forces me to, is this a local issue or is this a statewide issue? Does it require statewide action? Or is it something we could be addressing locally? I'm ignorant as to what statewide zoning would look like, but we don't currently have it. We have for Kauai, we have a good general plan. We have a good community development plans, which in Honolulu, we have refused to reopen. We are way late doing it. And the North Shore residents have said, no, we're afraid to open it up because it's only going to get diluted. We like it the way it is. That's been a long-standing conflict up here, but it isn't equitable. That it is not.
Yeah, thank you, Makala. I think I have enough to report to the full group on our thinking. It was a good conversation, and I appreciate everybody's input. Okay, anything else you can add? If you think of anything later, just join in on the conversation this afternoon, starting at 1 o'clock. And thank you all for participating, and we'll adjourn at 10:45.